Hello, music makers. Welcome back. Dean left this comment just as I was writing the ARP video last month, asking if I could work out that intro ARP on Union Jack's track Red Herring. It's a great ARP, so I got straight to work, thinking I could just add it to the end of the video. However, it turns out there's so much to discuss here that it deserves its own video. We've got some rave harmony, acid sound design, and I've got 4 different methods for writing these ARPs. Let's go. Okay, first of all, let's have a listen to the final result. Okay, not too bad. It's not perfect to the record, but as you'll see over the course of this video, there's so many variables to this. I could be here till the end of time trying to get it there. But given the nature of the gear used to make this record in 1995, I'm quite sure any subsequent takes, even by Union Jack themselves, would have come out slightly differently. So what gear are we talking about? Well, initially I thought this would be a 303, but then I noticed things that a 303 couldn't do. So my next guess would be an SH101, as that synth also had a great filter which lent itself well to that classic acid bark. Because the puzzles of matching these sounds isn't just about matching the waveforms. That classic acid bark we know comes down to the character of the filter, but also and especially the distortion, which can be inherent to the filter itself or come from external sources. And this is one of the hardest parts of reverse engineering sounds, because distortion can be so transformative to a sound that it barely represents the original sound underneath. Guitar players know this. Well, the ones in heavier genres do anyway. The typical rock or metal guitar tone coming out of a guitar amp sounds extremely different to what went in. If you didn't know, a guitar amp, in simple terms, is basically just 2 or 3 distortion stages in a row. In fact, let me just show you. Have a listen to this guitar. Except that's not a guitar, it's just Vital playing a sine wave and a saw wave through line 6's helix. Now listen to this without the distortion. It's just a saw and a sine wave. So, as you can see, distortion can be extremely transformative. Now, is this just an excuse to tell you why I couldn't get the sound exactly spot on? Yes, but it's also a lesson. The lesson being that when we are sound designing, we have to factor in distortion. It has to be part of the sound design process. At least the decision to include it should be, anyway. Because it can be so transformative, it can be as important as your initial waveform selection. Now, when it comes to this track, obviously there are distortions from the media. It was recorded to tape, mastered to tape, played back on tape to cut to vinyl, and then we're hearing the playback on vinyl, each of which will add its own subtle distortions, or not so subtle, depending on how it was handled. And then we have the distortion from either the synth itself or an external source. As I mentioned in the Josh Wink video, where I recreated Higher State of Consciousness, it was popular to put 303s through guitar distortion pedals. So to give me a solid starting point, I've basically done the same thing here. Again, using the great emulation of the Ibanez Tube Screamer inside BYOD. Again, this is all guesswork though, and it doesn't sound quite the same as the record. So to get it to behave more like that, I've had to put an EQ before and after it, mostly to change the mid behavior. I could have used any EQ to do this, by the way, but I do like EQs that don't show the curve. That way I have to adjust everything by ear. Now, as I said, distortion has to be factored in to the sound design process. So I've had to go back and forth tweaking this as I find the correct settings on the synth too. So if you ever thought I made this kind of stuff look easy, no, it's not. This was a tough one. Okay, speaking of synth settings, let's just ignore the second oscillator and filter for a second. This is the main oscillator. The original 303 or 101 would have been a saw wave or square wave through a resonant filter into a distortion. That's our typical acid setup. This is mostly that. I'll explain the differences later. But to get close to the record, I ended up using this second waveform going through this filter. Let me solo that so you can hear it on its own. Now, this is something a 303 or a 101 couldn't do. But I could hear this top buzz to the sound regardless of the filter position. And this comes back to the distortion thing again. This, on the original record, is more likely a distortion artifact from somewhere in the chain than it is a tone produced by the synth, unless it was faulty. As we now know, some of Josh Wink's sound came from either a modified or faulty 303. Or maybe Union Jack used modular synths. Who knows? One of the other things I noticed on the record was the difference between soft and hard sounds. And even though the main filter is slowly opening through the sequence, some notes would jump out. It's quite dynamic. Now, on certain sequences, like the built-in one to the TB303, you can program in accent notes. And depending on the synth, that could result in different things. It might just make the note louder, or it might open the filter a little, maybe up the resonance, or extends the envelope decay, etc. Basically, things that would make the accented notes jump out from the others. So to emulate that, I've done a little bit of everything here. Lots of things responding to velocity changes, which I'll show you on the MIDI later. First of all, we have the levels of the oscillators themselves responding to velocity via this dial. Then over here, you can see velocity is responsible for another 8 changes. We have modulation amount of envelope 2. Envelope 2 is being sent to filter cutoff. So basically, when a key is pressed harder, the amount that this envelope changes the filter increases. Sample level, we can ignore this one. I'm no longer using the white noise. Oscillator waveframe. So that is this parameter here. So what's happening here is when the key is pressed softly, we have a triangle wave, not many harmonics. But as the key is pressed harder, it morphs into a sawtooth, lots of harmonics. So that's another way we can dynamically brighten the sound. Now, those amongst you that experience the original hardware will know neither the 303 or the 101 could produce a triangle wave. So either I'm hearing more extreme filtering on the original, or it isn't either of those synths. But this is what I had to do to get it close to the record. Anyway, back to velocity modulations. Here we have resonance on filter 2, resonance on filter 1 cutoff, and filter 2 cutoff. And lastly, oscillator 2, that buzz sound, that gets louder. So all of this is changing depending on how hard the key is pressed. Let me show you that working. Soft note, loud note. Now, as you might have heard there, we are also utilizing a lot of delay, specifically dotted 8th note delay, which is this rhythm. See my delay tutorial if you want to know more on that. So, as if getting the sound right wasn't hard enough, I also had to figure out what the notes were whilst a delay was adding all these extra notes. Let me show you the part without delay. And with. Quite the difference. Essential to the atmosphere, of course. It just makes my job a lot harder. So speaking of working out the notes, here's what I got. Now, this actually looks a little scarier than it really is, because all of this is just a one-bar pattern repeated. And that makes a lot of sense, because a lot of hardware sequences around this time, be it the one inside the 303 or some other one, were often limited to 16 steps, which would be one bar of 16s, of course. So it's a one-bar pattern on repeat, just changing in total pitch. Let's look at that pattern. What do we have here? We have a D sharp, G, and C. Those are the notes of C minor. And if you look throughout, that's all there is. Those three notes, but in different octaves. So to show you the full thing, what we do is repeat, repeat, repeat. So we have 8 of those, and then we pitch some of them. These two go down by 5. That's now a G minor chord. This pair goes down by 2, making B flat minor. And the last pair go down by 7. That's an F minor. That's the full sequence. You can see the basic triads on the pad part over here. There we are. All patches will be in the description, of course. So in terms of key, where are we? It's mostly C minor, because the chords C minor, G minor, and F minor are all in C minor. This one, however, B flat minor, is not. This is the rave harmony bit. I call this rave harmony or parallel harmony. I explained it in my video about sampling chords. This is another example, because B flat is note 7 in C minor, and in a minor key, chord 7 is usually major, but it's not here, because all of this sequence has just been shifted round in parallel. So it's just one minor chord being moved around, regardless of whether it lands in key. And that's what gives us the ravey vibes. Let me show you this in A, just to make it a little simpler to look at. So all the white notes are our minor key now. All these chords landing on white notes. Chords 4, 5, and 1. But 7, we have this A sharp here. That's the one that's landed out of scale. It would normally be here. So C minor rave is my verdict. Or static harmony, parallel harmony, or Oscar at Underdog calls it chord planning, I believe. Basically, things moved around in parallel. Or to use the proper term, transposed. When you take something and pitch the whole thing to a new key, that's what we call transposing. So when I move this down by 5, that would be transposing -5, or transposing from C to G. So that's the working out part done. But what if we wanted to make our own? How on earth do you make an ARP like that? Can you even write an ARP like that? Or should you? Isn't it more appropriate that it's done by machine? Isn't it just random? And the answer is yes, 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 and yes. Let's do them all. I've made music in lots of different ways throughout my career. Even though I usually already know the notes and chords I want ahead of time, still, the technology in front of me changes the way that music gets made and ultimately changes the way that music turns out. Whether it's a traditional piano-style keyboard, an MPC or push-style drum pad setup, or just drawing MIDI notes in with the mouse. Regardless of your intentions, it's all going to change the way the music comes out. And it's the same with sequencers. The muso in me would love control over every note. But the dance producer in me wants to hear what happy accidents the tech is going to throw at us. So let's start with the semi-random. Let's hold a chord down. Might as well choose C minor again. So for the semi-random method, we're just going to use our DAW's built-in arpeggiator. I'm pretty confident every DAW has one of these built in now. Please let me know if yours doesn't. I'll be very curious to find out. Anyway, we're going to set it to 16ths, obviously. The gate is the note length. About half sounds good. And we're going to set it to random. So like this, it's just going to cycle between these three notes randomly. Now let's say span a couple more octaves. Now obviously the problem with this is it's random. Every time you play this back, it's going to be different. So you can't really use this in the track. Well, you could. Maybe that's the selling point. It's different every time. But I recommend always having a capture track ready. I have a separate MIDI track here, which is set up to receive all of the MIDI that's spat out by these devices. That way I can record everything. Now we can look at that. Pick and choose from the bits that we like. This sounded like it would make a good start. Maybe that at the end. Fill in the middle. We only need one bar, remember? That'll do. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Get 8 bars. Let's shift around some chords. I won't do the same one as Union Jack. Let's go with -2, -7, and -4. So that gives us a progression of 1, 7, 4, 6. Make sure our delay is on. Sounds good to me. By the way, top tip, chord 6 is also a good rave chord if you keep it minor, because it's normally major in the diatonic minor scale. Now, that was semi-random. What about truly random? We don't even need any MIDI for this one. This device called Sting. This is Ableton specific as it's a Max for Live device, but its job is to make acid lines. Click the face. Let's get some more notes in there. Now, I did say random. These are atonal, meaning there is no key, there's no center to this. Random notes, which, to be honest, is closer to what you might end up with trying to program a real 303 for the first time. Remember, always have that capture track ready, because I guarantee if you don't, the first thing that comes out of one of these generators will be an absolute banger, and you'll never be able to reproduce it. Okay, let's grab that. Now, if you're vibing off that, you can just use it as is, obviously. But if we want something more like Union Jack's track, then we can either put this through a scaler plugin so that it sticks to a chord, or we can manually do it. I'm just going to move these to the nearest notes of C minor. That could be the low C. Something like that. Let's try filling in some gaps. I think these would sound better on the D sharp. That's getting there. You can see this plugin changes velocities too. but we can pick our own accents. Something like that. Okay, so the third way we're going to do this is via an actual sequencer. I prefer sequencers like this, something that doesn't look too close to MIDI, a little bit like the hardware of the time. You're going to end up with something different than the other methods, very conducive to happy accidents. This is the catchily named MPS3 by HY Plugins. Unfortunately, the free version here has a slightly annoying limitation. We have 3 blocks of 4, so 12 notes. So we either have to repeat one of these blocks, or we can swap between A and B banks of any of these blocks to get our 16. By default, we are triggering the note C. Let's get some random pitches going. And down here we have the handy MIDI plugins, so we can force this into a scale or chord if we so wish. By default, it's set to chromatic, meaning every note. But if we go in here, we have plenty of scale options. For the red herring effect, I'm just going to go natural minor again. Keep this episode consistent. Here are the velocities, so we can choose some accents. So to make this 16 in total, I can choose 4 blocks over here. And what I'm going to do is have it repeat block 1, but on bank B. Make sure this one is A. So now we have 16. So it plays the first block, the second block, the third block, then back to the first block, but on bank B. Let's go back to these accents. That sounds good. On this row, we can play around with octaves. We can choose the total octave of the whole thing, and we also have a transpose. Now, if you try different keys, it will just move the nearest notes. But if we press root shift, it will shift the entire thing with new root notes. It's the same thing I did earlier, shifting the whole pattern up and down, like Union Jack did. And another cool thing, this root note parameter is also automatable. So that's another way you can do these lines. On to the last method, full manual for the control freaks amongst you. Now, writing these manually, obviously there's no definitive method, but the way I would suggest is actually the reverse of how I worked these notes out in the first place. 1 bar is all we need. The way I worked this out was to figure out the top accents first. try to imagine a funky drum groove, like do-dat-da-da-da-da-da, and then try to work out that rhythm as low and high parts. On any two pitches for now, it doesn't matter. That would be something like this. Obviously, I'm going to be a little faster at this. You might need to trial and error this. Maybe think about it like a kick drum and snare drum. That kind of thing. Anyone need beatboxing lessons? You get the idea. Speaking of kick drums, they're always handy to have around. Sometimes you can lose the one if you don't have a marker there to remind you. Anyway, so we can use this as the whole basis for our pattern and then just fill in the gaps. The top note doesn't have to be the same every time. You can try this. Try a top C here. Actually, I like that happy accident. That off-sounding B natural up there. Let's try filling in some gaps. Put these on low C. Maybe a C in this octave. How about a G? No, I don't like that. Let's try another C. Nope. Let's try this. Yes, that's better. Maybe try the G here. Can we fit some doubles in there? I like doubles. Yep, sounds good. Another low one, maybe. Oh yes, another happy accident. Don't forget, note length can be a way of accenting too. And don't let all that velocity programming on the synth patch go to waste. So that's how I'd go about it. Find a cool up and down accent pattern and then flesh it out by filling in the gaps, moving the notes around to your chord of choice. And of course, if you want a sequence like the Union Jack one, we need to duplicate, repeat, repeat, and find yourself a cool chord sequence. Well then, I hope you learned something. If you did, you know what to do. Press some buttons for me. Don't forget to check the description for all the relevant links. And until next week, I'll see you in the comments. Bye-bye.